What's something creepy that happened years ago, but to this day you can't figure out why it happened? One time when I was probably 7, my brother would have been 8 or 9, we were laying in our parents' bed with our mom. We were all kinda just watching TV, it was about time for bed. My dad was in the bathroom, and we looked down at the foot of the bed to see the top of his head, shaved, peeking out, so we thought he was just messing with us. But we laughed, and he called out from the bathroom like, "What's up?" All 3 of us saw the same exact thing. My dad checked the house, and nothing. Another scarily similar story that my parents just told me about the other day, since I felt like strange things have been happening lately. The same thing happened, but they thought it was me, because all they saw was the top of my head, blonde hair, at the end of the bed. They thought I was messing around, or something, but after my head went down nothing came up. They checked, and I was asleep in my room. Edit. I'm 19, and my hair was blonde when I was like 5-6. When we first moved into this house, I used to be a police dispatcher in a rural area. In a small town, a woman was found murdered in her home, a single gunshot wound to the head. She was elderly, never married, didn't have any family. No gun, shell casing, gunpowder, or any evidence of a gun being fired in the house were ever found. The windows were all locked, the doors were dead-bolted shut. I forget the exact details now, it was either muddy or snowy out, any out-of-place footprints/tire tracks would have been obvious, and there were none. The only contact she had with people was going to church every Sunday. That's how the call was initiated. Someone from the church asked us to check on her after not seeing her for a few weeks, which was unusual. Police were stumped. They put out press releases asking for anyone with any possible information to come forward, but no one ever did. It was years ago, but I still wonder what the hell happened there. When I was in college, I lucked out by moving into a house with a roommate who went to the military but paid the rent anyway, so I had a house to myself. One day I was sitting at my computer when a text alert chimed from my Motorola flip phone. I grabbed it and went to check the message, and the battery cover, which had become loose over years of use, fell off. It fell past my lap toward the hardwood floor, but I never heard it hit. I searched for that battery cover for an hour before I finally gave up, taped my battery in, and resigned myself to finding it later. About a week after that I was packing to travel to my cousin's wedding. I was ready to leave the house, but when I went to put on my shoes, the only pair I, as a broke college student, had, I couldn't find them. I turned over every piece of furniture in my room, scouring every inch of the floor, and somehow could not find those shoes. I eventually left anyway, wearing sandals, having put off the drive so long I was almost late, and ended up running to Walmart to buy a cheap new pair of shoes. I made it to the wedding on time, had a great time, and headed home the next day. When I entered my room, I immediately saw my shoes, sitting by my bed in the exact place that I always put them. And upon inspection, inside the left shoe, I found the battery cover for my phone. Those shoes were not there when I left. Plus, I had worn them several times since I'd lost my phone cover, and it certainly wasn't inside the shoe that whole time. My roommate was at basic training during this time, so couldn't have been home, and no one else had a key. To this day I still have no explanation for this. I moved back to my hometown for a little while when I was 21. Lived with my parents briefly, and then around Christmas time got a job, and rented a cheap studio apartment in a really remote area of town. Moved in just a few days before the holidays, and only had enough money to get a bed, a couch, and a landline phone. On Christmas Eve, I was out with family members, and didn't come back to the apartment until super late at night, probably past 1 a.m. It was already spooky and lonely in the apartment, but it got way spookier when I realized my answering machine was blinking in the corner. As I stated, I'd only been at this place for a couple days, so I hadn't given the landline number out to anyone yet. The message was about 5 straight minutes of an elderly woman calling out my name, sounding all confused and scared. It's haunted me for decades. No idea who she was. Driving back from a trip at around 3 a.m. could not keep my eyes open. I pulled off the road onto an off-ramp in eastern New Mexico. It was snowing like a blizzard. As I fell asleep I thought I saw a werewolf standing in front of the car, and just ruled it as dreaming/exhaustion. I woke up minutes later to my girlfriend screaming at me. I looked behind me. In the driver's side window was a person wearing a dog head, was painted up, had bones and other animal leather on his body, but still looked naked of sorts. Started the car and drove until we hit Albuquerque. Years later we drove out there and checked all 3 stops near where we could have pulled off. We drove for miles and miles and found not one livable house nearby. All abandoned for decades. Never figured out how or why someone was just out there during a snowstorm. Also, I had set an alarm for 30 minutes to sleep. It went off later on in the drive after we left. We could not have been parked there for more than a few minutes. I was standing next to a man at the meat counter of Whole Foods on Christmas Eve. I was close enough to hear his cell phone conversation. His phone rang, and he just sat there speechless. He said to the person, "My daughter is dead." Then he hung up, and called back the number, which was from his house, and asked if someone there called him. No one did! He told his wife that their daughter, who had passed away, just called him! All she said on the other line was, "Dad, it's me." My mind is still wrapping around this, and it was 10 years ago! When we were little, about 10-11, and my older sister was 15-16, someone randomly left a snack-sized Ziploc full of dirty used buttons, and single earrings, and necklace pendants without the chains in our mailbox. They left the bag with a small book that appeared to be illustrated for children, but I believe it was an abc of sorts, but with curse words. Still, she and I have no idea where it came from. Nothing else came about from it. When I was probably 15, my parents left me home alone for a few hours to go run errands. Being a teenager, I wanted to hang out in my room and talk on the phone. About 2 hours after they left, I heard the door open and footsteps in the hall and on the stairs. The footsteps only lasted a minute or two, and I just assumed my parents had come home. Fast forward 30 minutes, I leave my room to get some lunch. On my way to the living room I looked out the window and saw that my parents' car wasn't in the driveway. When I walked out into the main house, both the front and back doors were wide open. It really freaked me out. We had dogs, and they never barked to indicate that someone was in the house, and nothing was missing. I live and work on a small, remote island with about 300 residents. There are few women and no children. It's essentially a work camp. I was trying to fall asleep in my bed with my back to the door when I heard the door open and someone walk in, the floor creaking. I have housemates, and it wouldn't be unusual for one of them to walk in drunk and ask for ibuprofen, or ask what time we report to the boat tomorrow, or something. So I ask, "What's up?" And a little girl replies, "Daddy, I'm lost." I yell and sit up in bed, whipping around to face the voice. A shadow about 4 feet tall is in front of me, and when I jolt and yell again, it fades into the wall behind it. I know it was my imagination, but I was thoroughly spooked to the bone. Like I said, there are no children on the island, but there used to be back when the island was a ranch with working *ranchero* families living alongside the Native American inhabitants. Still gives me goosebumps to think about it. I've written about this before, so we'll do a short version. I lived with my grandparents at the time. Was heading home after being gone for a month for work. Was about to call and talk, but decided against it. Landed in TX and had a bunch of phone calls and voicemails. Grandfather had killed himself. Caught flight back home. Parents picked me up. Stayed up late with my grandma, my mom, and aunts/uncles. After everyone went to bed, I went into the red room, called this because at one point it had this great red flocked wallpaper. It was essentially a small library where my grandpa spent most of his time. He was a voracious reader. I broke down and cried and cried. I talked with him as though he was there. The guilt I felt for not calling was overwhelming. I finally said goodnight and went over to touch the leather chair where he always sat. It was warm, like someone had been sitting there and listening. I have no logical explanation for it.